My brother banned my daughter from his wedding 4 days before the ceremony, then expected my credit line to keep paying for the chandeliers, champagne, and 5-piece string quartet he could not afford. The message came at 8:12 on a Tuesday night while I was sitting at my kitchen table in Rockport, Massachusetts, with a yellow legal pad, a cold mug of coffee, and the final vendor schedule spread out in front of me. The house smelled like lemon floor cleaner and the buttered noodles my 7-year-old daughter had eaten for dinner. Rain tapped against the window over the sink, steady and small, like fingernails on glass. Nolan wrote, "Do not bring Ren. You showing up with her will make everything uncomfortable. Keep your strange little kid home." I read it twice. Not because I misunderstood him, not because I needed the words to rearrange themselves into something kinder. I read it twice because a part of me still believed my own brother would not be foolish enough to put cruelty in writing while I was the person quietly carrying $68,400 of his wedding risk in my name. He was. Across the table, Ren was sorting sea glass by color, blue pieces in one line, green in another, clear ones near her elbow. She had been collecting them for 3 weeks because she wanted to glue the smallest blue pieces around the wedding card she made for Nolan and his fiancée, Rebecca. She looked up when my face changed. "Mom," she asked, "did I do something wrong?" That was the moment the room went silent for me. The refrigerator hummed. The rain kept tapping. Somewhere upstairs, the old baseboard heater clicked twice and settled, but inside my chest, everything went flat and cold, the way it used to feel when I worked late fraud reviews and knew a file was about to become ugly. Ren had not thrown a tantrum at any event. She had not ruined a dinner or embarrassed anyone. She was quiet, sensitive to loud sounds, and sometimes stepped outside when rooms became too bright, too crowded, too sharp around the edges. She liked predictable plans, soft sweaters, tide pools, harbor seals, and drawing birds with too many feathers. That was her crime. For months, Nolan had let her believe she was welcome. He had called her his little flower captain because she was supposed to walk down the aisle before Rebecca's nieces. He had watched her practice a tiny speech in my living room, nodding with that easy smile that made people forgive him before he even apologized. Then, 4 days before the wedding, he decided she was bad for the photographs. I did not call him. I did not send a furious paragraph. I placed the phone face down, kissed Ren's forehead, and told her an adult had made an unkind choice that had nothing to do with her worth. Then I carried my coffee to the office, shut the door, and opened the folder Nolan had signed 9 months earlier. The red folder. I had not chosen red for drama. I chose it because red is hard to misplace in a drawer full of tax returns, mortgage statements, and school forms. It held the agreement my brother signed when he came to me asking for help after his 3rd financial collapse in 6 years. It held the lender terms, venue deposit receipt, vendor authorization rules, repayment schedule, and every email where I had written the same sentence in slightly different ways. No additional charges without written approval. Nolan had initialed that sentence 7 times. 9 months earlier, he arrived at my house with blueberry muffins from Cape Ann Bakery and a smile so nervous it reminded me of childhood. He sat at the same kitchen table, turning a paper cup of coffee between both hands, while Ren built a tower of dominoes in the living room. He told me his credit had been damaged by an old restaurant investment, a business card he was almost done handling, and a personal loan he had not mentioned to our parents because Dad's blood pressure was already bad. Almost done handling meant unpaid. Rebecca believed his debts were cleaned up. Her parents had paid for her dress, photography, and the welcome dinner, but they refused to fund the venue. Nolan wanted Seabrook Hall, a white-columned waterfront estate outside Gloucester with stone terraces, salt air, and a ballroom where the ceiling looked like old money pretending not to show off. The deposit alone was $22,750. His bank declined him. The venue declined his card. His application for a wedding loan came back denied before lunch. So he did what Nolan always did when consequences came knocking. He came to me. I had spent 12 years in financial compliance for a regional bank and another 4 consulting on internal fraud controls. I knew how accounts were abused. I knew how signatures became loopholes. I knew how charming people turned urgency into a weapon. I also knew my brother, so I refused to co-sign anything open-ended. Instead, I created a controlled wedding credit facility in my name, with Nolan listed only as an authorized user. Every vendor was registered. Every payment had a cap. Anything above $5,000 required my written approval, and any suspicious charge allowed me to suspend access immediately. Nolan smiled when he signed. "My big sister, the audit queen," he said, tapping the pen against the paper. "Good thing one of us grew up responsible." Everyone laughed. I should have listened harder. Growing up, I had always been the load-bearing wall of the Whitman family. Nolan cracked Dad's workshop window when we were kids, and I said I did it because he cried so hard he got hiccups. At 16, he backed Mom's station wagon into a mailbox, and I used summer job money to fix the dent before she noticed. At 24, he lost rent money betting on a Patriots game, and I transferred him $1,200 because he said he would be evicted. Every rescue taught him the wrong lesson. He did not learn gratitude. He learned that if he made the mess large enough, I would bring a broom. Our parents helped with that education. Mom called it keeping peace. Dad called it protecting family. I called it what it was only years later, after my divorce, when I finally heard myself explain the pattern out loud to a therapist who wrote one word in her notebook and turned it toward me: conditioning. The wedding was supposed to be different because I had paperwork. For the first 3 months, it was clean. Venue deposit paid. Caterer deposit paid. Flowers within budget. Rentals ordinary, maybe slightly inflated, but not dangerous. Nolan sent receipts with cheerful little notes, as if documentation were a game we were playing together. Then the additions started. Imported linens, premium bourbon, a late-night oyster bar, extra floral arches, vintage car service, a second photographer, custom guest boxes filled with maple candies, engraved bottle openers, and little jars of sea salt nobody needed. Every time I questioned a charge, Nolan said Rebecca's family expected a certain standard. That phrase did a lot of work. By early May, the agreed limit was nearly gone. By late May, a vendor called Blue Lantern Events submitted an invoice for $18,750, labeled Hospitality Staging and Guest Acquisition Materials. I called Nolan from the parking lot of a market basket because the wording made my teeth itch. He said it was normal. Nothing about it was normal. Still, I did not freeze the account then, because the invoice was just vague enough to pass if attached to a luxury wedding weekend. Nolan promised to send backup. He never did. 2 weeks later, he asked for a temporary limit increase because Seabrook Hall wanted final payment the morning of the ceremony, and he claimed his year-end bonus would cover everything by Monday. I said no. That was before the text about Ren. At 9:04 that Tuesday night, I called the lender's fraud and authorization department. The agent's name was Carla, and I remember that because her voice was calm in the particular way people sound when they understand a problem might become evidence. I confirmed my identity, answered 3 security questions, and removed Nolan's access from every account where he had been an authorized user. Then, I froze all future charges. At 9:38, I emailed Seabrook Hall, the caterer, the florist, the rental company, the transportation service, and the string quartet's booking office. My message was plain. I would honor payments already settled under written authorization. I would not authorize additional charges. Any remaining balances had to be paid directly by Nolan Whitman or Rebecca Hale. No adjectives, no accusations, no family drama, just boundaries. At 10:06, the venue coordinator called. Her name was Marisol, and she had the tired politeness of a woman who had watched expensive weddings reveal cheap character. I stood in my office in socks, looking at the dark window, while she explained the final balance was not $17,000, as Nolan had told me. It was $39,860. The caterer was owed $14,420. Rentals were owed $8,975. The florist still had $6,300 pending. Blue Lantern Events had submitted a second invoice for $12,200. Marisol cleared her throat before telling me Nolan had requested 3 extensions and assured everyone that my sister handles the family accounts. There it was. My sister handles it. That sentence had followed me for most of my life. It sounded harmless to strangers, helpful even, but inside my family, it meant Abby will absorb the impact. Abby will explain the missing money. Abby will take the uncomfortable call, fix the broken thing, calm Mom down, protect Dad's heart, and let Nolan stay charming. Not this time. The next morning, Nolan discovered the freeze when a charge for imported champagne failed at 10:11. He did not call to ask what happened. He created a family group chat titled Abby's Breakdown and added our parents, 2 cousins, Rebecca's sister Erin, and me. His first message said I had sabotaged his wedding because I was bitter about being divorced. Mom responded in under 30 seconds. Abigail, restore the account right now. You are embarrassing this family. Dad wrote, financial disagreements should be handled privately. Aunt Lorraine added, weddings are stressful. Try not to make this about Ren. I stared at the screen while the office smelled like printer toner and cold coffee. The old laser printer beside my desk warmed up with a soft electric whine. I opened Nolan's text from the night before, took a screenshot, and dropped it into the chat without comment. Do not bring Ren. You showing up with her will make everything uncomfortable. Keep your strange little kid home. For 3 minutes, nobody wrote anything. Then Rebecca typed, that was badly phrased, but there were concerns about disruptions. Concerns. People use polished words when they want cruelty to sound administrative. Ren was not being excluded. There were concerns. She was not being punished. There were optics. She was not being treated like something embarrassing. There was a guest experience to protect. I wrote one reply. The accounts are in my name. Nolan's purchasing access has been withdrawn. Payments already made remain paid. Any remaining wedding costs are the responsibility of the couple. Then I muted the chat. Mom called 11 times before noon. When I finally answered, she did not ask whether Ren was hurt. She asked how much Nolan needed. I told her the outstanding number, and she made a small, breathless sound, like a glass had cracked in her throat. That can't be right, she whispered. It is right. He told me less than 20,000. He lied. The word hung there between us. Outside my office window, a gull cried over the harbor, sharp and lonely. Mom lowered her voice, as though Nolan might hear her from 6 miles away. He is under pressure, Abby. Release the money until after the wedding. Your father and I will make him face this afterward. Afterward. There is always an afterward with golden children. They get rescued now and corrected later. Later turns into next week. Next week turns into never. The family calls it mercy because cowardice sounds uglier. I said, why is family peace always purchased with my money? Mom told me I was being dramatic. I hung up. For the rest of that day, I audited everything, not because I wanted revenge, though I would be lying if I said no part of me wanted Nolan humiliated. I audited because numbers tell the truth faster than relatives. They do not care who was popular in high school, who made Mom laugh, who cried during apologies, or who looked better in a suit. Numbers just sit there. By 4:30, I had a timeline. At 7:14 p.m. on April 18th, Nolan approved the first Blue Lantern invoice from an IP address registered to his office at Northeastern Shore Development, where he worked as a junior acquisitions manager. At 8:02 the same night, Blue Lantern transferred $13,500 to a personal account ending in 4419. That account belonged to Nolan. The invoice was a cash-out scheme. By 6:10, I found another problem. Nolan had attached our parents' rental cottages to a document called Whitman Coastal Portfolio Investor Preview. He listed himself as managing partner. He listed Dad as a passive stakeholder. My name appeared nowhere, even though I had managed the cottages, taxes, rental income, insurance renewals, and repairs for 5 years after Dad's first heart procedure. The projected value was $2.4 million. The requested investment was $600,000. The security description said, family-controlled coastal lodging assets, which sounded official enough to impress people who wanted to believe they were getting early access to a quiet gold mine. Nolan had no ownership authority. He had no approval from me. He had no legal right to pledge, market, or describe those properties as security. He had forged confidence into a pitch deck. I printed everything. Every invoice, every authorization rule, every email, every transfer timestamp, every screenshot, every vendor statement, every page of the investor deck. The printer clicked and sighed for nearly 40 minutes. Warm paper slid into the tray, smelling faintly of heat and ink. The red folder got heavier. At 7:22, Aaron called me. Rebecca's younger sister had never liked me much, or maybe she had never known me without Nolan's version standing between us. Her voice shook when she said Rebecca had started asking questions after seeing the group chat. Nolan had told her my divorce made me unstable around money. He said Ren's issues had made me controlling. He said I was jealous because his wedding proved he could build a life while mine had fallen apart. That was his mistake. Rebecca could excuse debt. She could excuse stress. She could even excuse family mess if the tuxedos were already rented and 200 guests had flights booked. But once Nolan started diagnosing me from a distance to explain why his own sister should not be trusted with her own credit line, Rebecca stopped hearing him as a fiancé and started hearing him as a witness with a bad story. Aaron asked me for proof. I sent 3 files, not 20. The original agreement, the screenshot about Ren, the Blue Lantern transfer summary. I did not send the investor deck yet because I wanted to know who else had seen it and where it had traveled. Evidence has a temperature. You do not throw it before it is hot enough to burn. That night, Ren found me at the kitchen table and placed the unfinished wedding card beside my laptop. The sea glass around the edges caught the overhead light. She had drawn Nolan, Rebecca, herself, and me under an arch of blue flowers. Everyone had long arms because Ren liked people to look like they could reach each other. "Can we still mail it?" she asked. I wanted to say no. I wanted to tell her gifts should not be sent to people who treat children like problems to manage, but she was 7, and her heart had not yet learned to shrink around other people's failures. "You don't owe anyone a gift just because you made it," I said, "but you can decide later." She touched one blue piece. "Will Uncle Nolan stop being mad?" I looked at her small fingers and thought about every year I had wasted trying to keep Nolan from being mad, embarrassed, exposed, inconvenienced, or responsible. I thought about how easily he had called my daughter strange while reaching for my money. I thought about what she would learn if I restored the account. She would learn that dignity can be rented. I said, "His feelings are not yours to fix." On Friday morning, one day before the wedding, Dad came to my office. He looked older than he had a week earlier. His jacket smelled like rain and cedar, and his hands trembled slightly when I handed him the red folder. He sat across from my desk while the heater ticked under the window. Page by page, I showed him. First the agreement, then the charges, then Blue Lantern, then the deck with the photographs of the cottages Dad had bought before Nolan and I were born. The cottages were not glamorous. They had sticking doors, salt-stained windows, and decks that needed repainting every other summer. But they were ours, and Nolan had turned them into bait. Dad did not shout. He removed his glasses, folded them, and placed them on the desk with such care it scared me more than anger would have. "Your mother knew he wanted you and Ren removed," he said finally. "She told me it was just seeding stress." "Did she know about the investors?" "No." His voice broke on the word. "I don't think she knew that." Then he opened his phone and found an email Nolan had sent him 2 months earlier. The subject line said mortgage verification. The attachment was a family asset confirmation form. Dad had signed electronically, believing Nolan and Rebecca were trying to qualify for a house after the wedding. The form did not transfer property, but it allowed Nolan to claim preliminary access to family income figures during investor conversations. The signature had been obtained under false pretenses. It was not clever. It was desperate, and desperation makes sloppy criminals. Dad looked at the signature for a long time. "I am done," he said. 4 words. On Saturday, I took Ren to the Atlantic Marine Rescue Center in Salem instead of the wedding. She wore her yellow raincoat even though the morning had cleared, because the coat made her feel safe in crowded places. The lobby smelled like salt water, rubber mats, and cheap coffee from a machine near the gift shop. Children whispered in front of the seal tank while pumps churned softly behind the glass. At 11:17 a.m., Seabrook Hall ran the final payment. Declined. My phone began vibrating in my coat pocket at 11:26. Nolan first, then Mom, then Nolan again, then Rebecca, then Mom 3 times. I watched a young harbor seal push through cloudy water with one scarred flipper and did not answer. Nolan's messages changed quickly. Call me immediately. This has gone too far. Release the payment. We will settle it Monday. If you don't fix this, I'll tell everyone you committed fraud. There it was again, the old rhythm. Demand, plea, threat. He had used it since childhood, only the dollar amounts had grown teeth. At 11:41, Dad called. I answered because Dad did not call repeatedly unless something was truly on fire. Behind him, I heard voices, doors, and the clipped tone of a professional woman trying not to lose patience. Do not send money, he said. I won't. They are accusing you in the venue office. Rebecca wants the accounts. Nolan refuses to show her anything. Aaron has the copies you sent. The venue manager says without payment, only the ceremony covered by the deposit can proceed. No ballroom, no catering, no bar, no reception staff. I looked at Ren. She had both palms against the glass, smiling at the seal. I can come, I said. Not with Ren. Never with Ren. I called my neighbor, Mrs. Delaney, a retired school librarian who loved Ren like a second grandmother and lived 12 minutes from the rescue center. She arrived in a navy cardigan with peppermints in her purse and took Ren to the quiet observation room. I told Ren I needed to handle an adult problem. Is it Uncle Nolan? She asked. Yes. She nodded like that explained everything. I drove to Seabrook Hall with the red folder on the passenger seat. The road smelled like wet pavement through the vents, and every turn toward Gloucester made my phone buzz again. By the time I pulled into the venue lot, guests were standing under white tents with confused faces, holding champagne flutes that had not been refilled. A violinist sat on a folding chair, scrolling through her phone. Weddings have a sound when they begin to fail. It is not screaming, it is murmuring. It is heels on stone, staff whispering into headsets, ice shifting in buckets nobody is allowed to use yet. It is the thin, metallic click of a planner's pen as she realizes the schedule is no longer a schedule. Marisol met me near the side entrance. Her face did not change when she saw the folder. Good professionals do not enjoy disasters, but they recognize preparation when it walks through the door. Miss Whitman, she said, thank you for coming. The office behind the ballroom was crowded. Nolan stood in his tuxedo with his bow tie undone, red-faced and sweating near the copier. Rebecca sat in a white robe with her hair pinned for a wedding that was evaporating around her. Her parents stood behind her, pale and furious. Mom cried on a small love seat. Dad stood near the wall, arms folded. The room smelled like lilies and overheated electronics. Nolan saw me and pointed. There she is. She froze everything because she's unstable. I placed the red folder on the table. No, I said. One word was enough to make the room listen. I opened to the first tab and turned the agreement toward Marisol, then Rebecca, then her father. The account is mine. Nolan is an authorized user. Section 4 allows suspension of future charges after unauthorized spending, false vendor documentation, or risk of loss. He signed here, here, and here. Nolan laughed too loudly. This is insane! She's punishing me because I didn't want her kid ruining the ceremony. Rebecca flinched. I turned to the second tab. This is the text excluding my daughter. This is not why the account froze. It is why I stopped protecting him emotionally while I reviewed the money. Nobody spoke. Then I turned to the Blue Lantern invoice. This vendor billed $18,750 for guest acquisition materials. 3 hours later, $13,500 moved into Nolan's personal checking account, ending in $4,419. A second invoice for $12,200 was submitted Thursday. Blue Lantern is registered to Colin Mercer, Nolan's college roommate. Rebecca stood slowly. "Nolan," she said, "is that true?" He looked at her, then at me, then at Dad. "It was temporary." Temporary is a beautiful word for theft when thieves need a softer suit. I opened the next tab. This is the investor presentation scheduled for tonight's reception. Whitman Coastal Portfolio. Projected value, $2.4 million. Requested investment, $600,000. It describes Nolan as managing partner of family-controlled lodging assets. He has no ownership, no management authority, and no right to pledge those properties as investment security. Rebecca's father took one step forward. "You were going to pitch this to my partners?" Nolan's mouth opened. Nothing useful came out. Dad said, "I did not authorize this." Nolan snapped then. Not at me, at the room, at the facts, at the sudden refusal of reality to keep bending for him. None of this would have happened if Abby had controlled her weird kid and stayed out of my business. The office door was open. Guests heard him. Rebecca removed her engagement ring. The tiny scrape it made against her knuckle sounded louder than the ballroom music waiting outside. She set the ring on the table beside the red folder, not gently. "You banned a 7-year-old to hide financial fraud," she said. Nolan reached for her wrist. Her father stepped between them. Marisol moved toward the hallway and spoke quietly into her headset. Somewhere outside, the string quartet stopped mid-song. That silence traveled. By 12:08, Seabrook Hall announced that the full reception could not proceed because the balance remained unpaid. The deposit covered only a brief outdoor ceremony and non-alcoholic refreshments, but Rebecca refused to marry him. She changed clothes in the bridal suite and left through the service entrance, with Aaron carrying the train of a dress that would never touch the aisle. Nolan followed her into the courtyard. He should have stayed quiet. Instead, in front of guests, staff, and 3 people recording on phones, he shouted that Rebecca was throwing away her future because of a defective little distraction and a bitter sister with a spreadsheet fetish. The words scattered across the stone terrace like broken glass. Even Mom stopped crying. Something in her finally understood. The federal part did not happen like television. No agents rushed through the hydrangeas. No handcuffs clicked beside the cake table. Real accountability moves slower than public humiliation. But when paperwork starts walking, it does not get tired. By Monday, Northeastern Shore Development's legal office had the investor deck because one of Rebecca's father's partners forwarded it. By Tuesday, my lender had filed a formal fraud report based on unauthorized cash conversion invoices and suspected bank fraud. By Friday, Colin Mercer admitted Blue Lantern had been used to route cash back to Nolan in exchange for a 20% fee. 3 months later, Nolan was charged with wire fraud, attempted investment fraud, and identity-related financial misrepresentation connected to Dad's asset form. The U.S. attorney did not care that he was charming. The bank did not care that he was under wedding stress. The court did not care that Mom had spent 32 years calling him sensitive. The restitution figure was $74,315. He lost his job before the indictment because he had used his employer's logo on the deck without permission. Rebecca never took him back. Her parents sued to recover wedding-related expenses they paid based on false financial representations, and Nolan eventually settled by liquidating his truck, his brokerage account, and the last pieces of pride he still pretended were assets. Mom did not speak to me for 6 weeks. Then she came over on a Sunday afternoon with a casserole neither Wren nor I liked, and an apology she had written on stationery with little blue flowers at the top. Her hands shook as she read it. She said she had confused rescuing Nolan with loving him. She said she had treated my steadiness like a family utility, something she could turn on whenever the house got cold. I did not forgive her immediately. Forgiveness is not a vending machine. You do not insert tears and receive access. But I let her finish, And when Wren came downstairs with a library book about seals, Mom asked if she could read with her. Wren looked at me first. That look mattered. I nodded. Nolan wrote to me from a county facility in January after pleading guilty to reduced charges in exchange for cooperation. The letter was 3 pages long, which was 2 pages longer than any apology he had ever given me. At first, it sounded like him. Stress, pressure, fear, embarrassment, words arranged in a circle around responsibility without touching it. Then, near the bottom, something changed. He wrote, I called Wren strange because I needed you gone. I knew you would recognize the numbers. I knew Rebecca would believe you if you were in the room. I told myself I was protecting the wedding, but I was protecting the lie. I used you because you always came through, and I hated you for being the person I needed. I read that paragraph twice. Then I placed the letter in the red folder, behind the court order, behind the restitution schedule, behind the screenshot of his first message. Not because I needed to punish him forever, because memory is evidence too, and families are dangerous when they start editing. Wren mailed Rebecca the card months later, after the case was public and the town had moved on to other scandals. She added a postcard from the Marine Rescue Center. On the back, in careful purple marker, she wrote, Sometimes you need a safe place before you can swim again. Rebecca called me when she received it. She cried, but not the performative kind. She apologized for calling cruelty a concern. She said she had cared more about a perfect ceremony than a child's dignity until the truth tore the decorations down around her. Wren listened quietly. Then she said, I hope you find a nice quiet place. That is the thing Nolan never understood. My daughter was not weak because loud rooms hurt her. She noticed things other people missed. She knew when adults were pretending. She knew safe from unsafe before the rest of us finished explaining our reasons. She had been the alarm bell. And me? I did not ruin my brother's wedding. I did not steal his bride, bankrupt his venue, or summon consequences out of spite. I simply stopped lending my name, my credit, my silence, and my daughter's dignity to a man who thought family meant access without respect. The payment failed because Nolan failed first. That was the audit.